Have you ever felt like you were getting the dumbed down version of something really profound? Like someone was giving you the children's picture book edition of life's deepest mysteries. My brain has always worked in a specific way. I spot inconsistencies immediately. When I was a kid, I actually used to write to publishing companies showing them typos in their books. I'm not kidding. I feel like I probably wrote to them about 50% of the books I read. I couldn't believe how many errors made it to print. One thing's for sure, Judy Blume and R.L. Stine definitely need better editors. But the point is, when something's off, I feel it in my bones. Well, that same radar went crazy when I sat in church as a teenager. I'd hear the same surface-level interpretations of scripture over and over again, and I'd look around the room at everyone just nodding along. But inside, I felt this nagging sensation that there just had to be more. The stories we were being told felt like they were missing some crucial context. It was like watching a foreign film with subtitles that only translated every third line. Well, this feeling followed me well into adulthood. I would read spiritual texts and feel this electricity running through certain passages, sensing a deeper meaning just beyond my understanding. But whenever I'd ask questions, trying to dig deeper, I'd get shut down with, "That's just how it is," or "You just need to have faith," or "The Lord works in mysterious ways." Well, here's what most people don't realize. Many of the world's most profound spiritual teachings were intentionally written in layers. The surface meaning was for the masses, but encoded with deeper truths for those who were ready to receive them. Think about it. Jesus himself said he spoke in parables because seeing they do not see and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. So this isn't just ancient history. Today, an estimated 84% of the world's population identifies with a religious faith. That's over 6.5 billion people. Yet, how many of us are engaging with our spiritual traditions at the deepest level? How many of us are missing the profound mystical teachings that lie just beneath the surface? Well, the consequences of this spiritual superficiality, as I call it, are everywhere. We see religious texts being used to divide us rather than unite. We see ancient wisdom being reduced to these rigid rules instead of pathways for transformation. We see people fighting over different interpretations when they're all describing different parts of the same elephant. We'll get to that in the interview. But there is hope. Throughout history, there have always been those who've seen beyond the surface. Mystics, contemplatives, seekers who discovered the deeper dimensions of spiritual truth. And they left us with breadcrumbs in their writings and their teachings if we know how to follow them. What's fascinating is that when you start to uncover these deeper layers, these striking similarities across traditions become really obvious. So whether you're reading Christian mystics, Sufi poets, Buddhist teachers, certain core truths keep emerging. It's like they're all describing the same mountain, just from different sides. So the real question is, what happens when we start taking these deeper teachings seriously? What becomes possible when we move beyond surface-level spirituality and really engage with these truths about the nature of consciousness and reality and our own divine nature? Well, today our guest is Bob Peck. He's the author of a book that really touched my heart called Original Sin is a Lie, and he's a scholar of mystical traditions across religions. He grew up with a spiritual seeking father and experienced his own journey through a bunch of traditions. And now he's dedicated himself to uncovering and sharing the deeper layers of spiritual truth that unite us instead of divide us. So in this episode, you'll learn how institutional religions often distort spiritual truths and how to rediscover their original meaning. The surprising parallels between mystical teachings across different traditions, and how to move beyond surface-level interpretations to access deeper spiritual wisdom that can change your life. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. You guys, workplace stress is killing us. 61% of people are dealing with stress levels that are way beyond normal. So if you're feeling it, you are not alone. I used to think I could just push through everything. work harder, sleep less, pretend I had it all figured out. But that approach nearly broke me. I am all about following your joy. If that voice in your head is telling you to make a change, listen to it. Maybe you are ready to quit your job. Maybe you do need to flip your whole life upside down. But either way, you need support and tools to navigate it well. And that's where therapy comes in. Modern therapy teaches you how to set boundaries without feeling guilty, how to manage anxiety before it spirals, how to make big moves from a place of strength instead of desperation. And BetterHelp has over 30,000 therapists and has helped 5 million people worldwide. And you can talk to someone from your couch. No waiting rooms, no awkward scheduling. Therapy gives you the clarity on whether that voice telling you to make a change is your intuition or just the Sunday scaries. But either way, you deserve support. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Unwind from work with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/mindlove. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/mindlove. Let me ask you something. How much time did you spend last week thinking about what to eat? Planning meals, making grocery lists, wandering around the store like a lost tourist. I used to waste entire Sunday afternoons on this, and it was exhausting. Then I found Hungry Root. Hungry Root fills your cart with personalized picks and plans your week of meals, getting smarter with every order. They have over 15,000 recipes to choose from each week, and most are ready in 15 minutes or less. I'm actually headed to Michigan this week, and I had my Hungry Root order delivered there. So I already know that I have meals ready and plenty of snacks for the kids without scrambling to find a grocery store. It's just handled. And what I love most is their smart cart technology. It learns what I actually like and then recommends groceries, recipes, and supplements just for me. So no more buying spinach that rots in my fridge. They screen out over 200 additives and only source high quality ingredients. The time I've gotten back has just been life-changing. So take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/mindlove and use code MINDLOVE. That's hungryroot.com/mindlove, code MINDLOVE, to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/mindlove, code MINDLOVE.
The goal is to be like that person, to say, you're right. Christians, if you get joy and peace and love and purpose and, all these beautiful spiritual qualities from Christianity, that's your path. You don't have to leave it. Go deeper, dig the deep well. All I ask really for anyone on a religious spiritual journey is just to be open to the other characteristics of the divine and the potentiality, the possibility of there being transcendental characteristics that are beyond all of us, beyond word, beyond thought, etc.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
I'm really excited about this conversation. I read your book 2 years ago, and I was just like, yes. And I ended up writing down pretty much every reference that you wrote in the book and purchased those as well. I found out about, probably won't be able to see it, the second coming of Christ from you.
Absolutely amazing.
It's been life-changing. It inspired me to get into Course in Miracles, which had popped up a bunch of times in my life, but I wasn't really ready. So excited about this. And I'm curious, what inspired you to explore the mystical elements of religion and how they shaped your understanding of spirituality?
Well, it's a really great question. And, even to reference the books that you're pointing to, if all I am is a commercial for Yogananda and A Course in Miracles, then I'm doing my job. I'm happy to just be a billboard to the masters and the masterpieces. I'm really lucky. The book is called, as you mentioned, Original Sin is a Lie, which some people think is, means that I had this big kind of dramatic exit from Christianity, and that's not really the case. The title is just provocative because it's good marketing, and it's true. Original sin is a lie. No offense, Christian theologians, but um, yeah, I grew up basically with a kind of progressively open, spiritually, spiritual seeker of a father. My mom was kind of Easter Christmas Christian on my mom's side, so we would go Easter Christmas, but which I really liked. I liked to go to Episcopal Christmas Eve service and sing the songs with the family that we didn't know the words to. And in the meantime, my dad was kind of grew up Catholic, turned atheist, turned spiritualist in a very kind of what I've learned is like a very cohesive three-act structure for a lot of people, kind of growing up in a foundational religion and then leaving that at some point, either from their own experience or seeing the hypocrisy or at worst abuse. And he was like kind of a militant, like Chris Hitchens, Richard Dawkins atheist for a while. And then he met a woman. My parents divorced when I was 3. He met a woman who was a really special person, who was a Reiki healer and massage therapist and kind of ahead of her time in the 90s. And so he had, these books lying around. And in addition to a couple of experiences where people that I knew passed away when I was a child, not my immediate family, but extended. And yeah, that really set me off. I started reading, I think Thich Nhat Hanh, I read Living Buddha, Living Christ in like 7th grade or something like that. So that was 20 years ago. Yogananda in college. And really, as I, try to point out in the book, the perennial philosophy is what it's often called. There's this cohesive strand throughout all the religions and all the major faith traditions. And that strand of cohesion is the mystic philosophers. The institutions are different, There's a book by Stephen Prothero, who's a religion scholar, called God is Not One. And he basically kind of corrects this kumbaya notion that all the religions are the same. And, they are different. It's very true. They have different methods and concepts and takes on God, etc. But boy, those mystics, there's men and women throughout history, as you know, Melissa, that have broken the veil, kind of to use that term. And ultimately, their teachings are the same. Their teachings are that we all come from the divine. We have the divine in our hearts, and every being has that same, fractal, if you will, of the one. And so that's just always fascinated me. And it's a real joy to study the mystics and contemplate their teachings and try to integrate them.
I always had this hunch. It was like this pull that at the basis, the truth underneath any distortions, it's going to be really aligned or the same. And yes, some people have slightly different focuses depending on their life experiences and what brought them to that moment or that understanding. However, the truth is the truth. And I know I almost want to argue against myself in my head, like, well, there's the subjective truth and there's like our senses and all this, but no, like the basis of reality. And I just always had this feeling. And I remember when I was searching, I didn't really know how to search, how to go deeper. I mean, it took me years to come to the understanding that I am now, because it was like you had to like read a book and then somebody mentions something. I mean, when I was in high school, we were still dialing up internet and everything. It just wasn't quite as easy as it is now to access things. And even so, when there's a predominant narrative, it's hard to get past that. Like, I mean, we've all tried searching medical information on Google and we get the first 55 pages. It's like clearly one narrative when I'm just looking for the recipe for a holistic garlic thing. But what I started to find is at the surface level of everything, Yes, everything seems so different. But when you start to get to the heart of what Jesus was really saying, what Buddha was really saying, before all of the laws and the fear, it is remarkably similar. And I know part of what we cover in your book is how institutional religions often distort spiritual truths, which is not something that religious people want to hear. But can you share an example of where you've seen this happen?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. And I love your comment there. One of my favorite lines from Jesus is just, the truth will set you free, and there's a lot of question marks around what does that mean, but from the mystic view, the truth is we are one, and that knowledge of our oneness is liberating. Is how that would be something that Yogananda would quote, and that's like its second coming of Christ type of interpretation. A really great example, I talk about this in the book too, about in the Hindu concepts, there's this term called the Avatar doctrine, which is this idea that um, in the kind of cycles of reincarnation in which all sentient beings are dancing through the cosmos, every once in a while, you'll have a human being who is done. They're finished with their need for material incarnation. And that is what is called enlightenment. It's called atonement. There's all these different terms for it, awakening and so on. In my view, Buddha, really kind of my big three, and they're not just mine, but they live in my heart, which is Buddha, Krishna, and Christ. It was a real joy in the book to kind of look at their teachings very deeply and compare them. And to your point, when you get beyond the institutional later contributions, things like original sin, et cetera, when you strip away those kind of later components, it's very similar. Buddha talks about having radical compassion. He has a really good line where he says, cultivate a level of compassion for every being like a mother loves her child. That's the most powerful kind of love in terms of relationships that you can have. And at the same time, Jesus says, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. So they're both kind of smashing this kind of standard cultural idea of what love is. You love me, therefore I love you. No, the masters are saying capital L love is actually transcendental to condition. So that's a big one. I think another thing that's interesting about them, to your question more specifically, is that a lot of people understand Jesus was a Jew, which not all Christians seem to be aware of, strangely, but he sure was. He was an ancient Jewish teacher. And Buddha was, essentially a Hindu prince. Hindu is a modern word, so it's not quite, it's an anachronistic to say that, but he was of a Brahmin caste in ancient India. And so what both of them are doing in their kind of last lifetime, if you will, is that they're both correcting the religions of their day. So in Jesus' day, he's calling out the Pharisees. So the Pharisees were kind of the rabbinical Jewish teachers. They knew the law, they studied the code of conduct in the Torah, etc. And he calls them hypocritical at times. I could go into much more detail there if you want, but essentially he tells stories. The parable of the Good Samaritan is the best example, where he essentially says that the Jewish priest sees the man who has been attacked by robbers on the side of the road, and not only does he not help the man, but he crosses the road and keeps going on the other side. The same thing with the Levite, who's kind of a priest assistant within the Jewish religion. Why do they do that? Well, because there's very ancient Jewish law around touching a dead body can make you unclean, and that can bring repercussions for you and your community, et cetera. So they just said, that guy looks dead, I'm going to keep walking. And he uses the example of the third person, which is a Samaritan, who in that period was actually this is scholarship, a despised ethnic outcast. The Samaritans and the Jews, ancient Jews, did not like each other. They had fought in a war centuries prior. And the Samaritan does not follow those rules. What does he do? He has his donkey. He picks up the man who's injured, by the way, he's still alive, brings him to an inn, pays his own money to the innkeeper to give the guy room and board and heal him, etc. He says, if there's anything else, I'll be back tomorrow to cover the difference. And Jesus asks the man who had asked the question about good neighbor, who was the good neighbor here? And they say the third one, which some scholars will even say they say the third one, not the Samaritan, because they might have been culturally unwilling to admit that a Samaritan would do the right thing versus the Jewish leaders. So that's a great example of his kind of radical teaching style to call out what I think in his view had lost that divine spark of human connection, human empathy and love, etc. And
More
so that,
about law and less about love.
exactly, it just got wooden and rigid and prevents the right action in situations in a practical way. Buddha does the same thing. Buddha was very he would call out the Hindu priests, the ancient Vedic priests, in similar ways. There's a great example where he is confronted about. He comes up about. There's a lot of stuff in ancient Vedas about fire rituals, and kind of burning things and rites and so on. And there was a lot of stumbles on to kind of this discussion about how we set up the fire and the angles of the wood and all this stuff. And he's kind of sick of it. He goes, look, the fire is anger. The fire is lust. Don't worry about the sticks and the shape they're making on the ground. You're missing the point here. And so, they both have that quality. And this isn't unique to them. This is what all really the mystic masters, men and women throughout history who break the veil, they kind of have this playfulness. They have this lightheartedness at seeing kind of the hypocrisy and the egotism of that rigidity of the religious institution. And so I'm happy to point to them and their teachings in a historical way.
It's fascinating that people that we revere in two totally different religions or wisdom traditions, they have a sort of universal understanding of love and divinity. And I think that's for me is when my mind sparks, where I'm like, this is closer to the truth. All of the specifics around it are the paths, and there's multiple paths to God. There's not going to be just one path to God. Why would he do that? We all need different things. We resonate with different things. What works for my mother, what feels like it bonds her deeply to Jesus and God, doesn't make sense to me. I have too many questions. I'm like, wait, I was just having a conversation with somebody a couple days ago around the same topic. And she said, I believe Jesus is the only way to God. And so I do. And there's a lot of people dear to me that I am it makes me sad that I'm not going to see them in eternity. And, but then she did say, she's like, and I do still have a lot of questions, and I'll keep asking those questions. Like, the Native Americans were here before us. Who guided them? Who taught them? And I was like, that's a really great question to stick with, like if somebody is getting quiet and asking God, show me the way, and this is what they're being fed, how they're being guided, what they're being guided toward, are we going to say that's wrong? I can say that for 10 years I sat there and I was like, this is what's resonating with me. If I'm on the wrong path, please let me know. And I just kept getting seeds towards a different outcome than what certain people would say is the right one or the only way. And so I'm curious though. I remember when I read the title of your book, you're right, that provocative marketing really called to me. I was like, that's the question. There's something there that has felt that to me is kept believing that, okay, yeah, God made me and I am just destined for sin without this, isn't that also saying that he kind of made a mistake? You know, Adam and Eve failed first and it's our fault. Like, oh my gosh, sorry, we're not worthy. You made us, you know, like your story doesn't make sense to me. So I'm just curious for you, why was it so important for you to answer the overarching question of, or I guess it's not really a question, but the idea of original sin being a lie. Why is that the thing that pinpoints you and you guide your audience toward for with all of these other truths around it?
Yeah, great question. And to the point of the conversation with your friend, there's so many great Christians, and there's so many great folks that are within their religious tradition, and it's not my goal to criticize them or call them out. Rather, really, my only enemy is exclusivity, right? So I'm just calling out the concept of, specialness of a certain path, specialness of a certain people. If you think you're the chosen people, well, I hate to break it to you, but you're wrong, because we're all chosen. We're all children of Creator, and you are chosen. That's true, but so's everyone. And so, yeah, the book Original Sin is a Lie, really what it means is you're inherently good, or you're inherently divine. The Hindus have a really great image, I think, as opposed to original sin, which is that we're merely ignorant of our true self. That's all, because I get funny comments, and as you can imagine, original sin is a lie. That used to be the name of the account on Instagram and TikTok, and so I got a lot of good ones. And somebody said one time, original sin is a lie. Have you met a person? We're not that great, actually, and and it's funny, but it's the Vedic interpretation is that we're merely unaware of who we are. We're blinded by what's called samsara. We're blinded by this plane of time and space and sensual understanding of our world, which, as we know, thankfully, science is proving over the last couple hundred years that our senses aren't that great at understanding reality. And so the mystics just take it a step further to really say that our senses can actually blind us to the true understanding of who we are. Vivekananda has a great line. He says, it is we who put our hands over our eyes and cry that it is dark. So yeah, it's very, it's a fundamental idea in spirituality and mysticism that, we're all inherently have that divine spark within us. And, in my view, I try to make the case for it in a few dozen pages that Jesus also agreed with that, and that it was actually the later Christian fathers like Paul who starts it, but really Augustine or St. Augustine is credited with the kind of original sin being a foundational doctrine in Christianity, or churchianity, as Yogananda lovingly calls it.
I think people don't always realize, like they've been told, well, yes, these books are in here. They were chosen by a divine council. Everything was inspired by God. And they don't always realize or stop to think, okay, what was that process like? Right. Who is in power then? And especially now, there's a lot of Christians that are awake to the corruption in the government. There has always been corruption and greed within government, and government trying to keep us in their power, and which means often in some ways disempowering us so that we don't really realize our true nature. And so they don't realize also that when these conversations are happening, it's never been decided across the board. And there's actually certain things that biblical scholars actually have sort of come to the conclusions of across the board that's just not recognized by the church. And we've been telling these stories for so long, and people don't see that like they think they're so clear on even Jesus's birth and death and resurrection, not even realizing that if you actually read each book individually, they tell different stories. There's actually contradicting things in there. They're within the own book. And so
it's hard for people. It's really hard for some people to accept that. Bible scholarship has been so massive for me and massive for, I think, our society in the last about 200 years, is when we started to look at these texts from, Schweitzer calls it the quest for the historical Jesus. So, like, let's really look at the human process, to your point. I'm a mystic, so I believe that Jesus, essentially was an enlightened person, became divine. He became divine by eliminating his individuality. That's the process. That's the mystic dance in the waterfall. Is you remove your own egoic sense of entitlement and individuality. You just become a pure vessel of the divine. That's the goal. And we're all doing it. We're all doing it incrementally in certain ways, etc. But when you study Bible scholarship, Bible scholars, not all Bible scholars are mystics, by the way. Some of them are Christian and some are atheists. Some are crazy mystics too. But to your point, there's a really funny line. It's not in my book actually, but I made a video about it. About one of the first letters of Paul is Galatians. He's writing to the people of Galatia. He was traveling around the Greco-Roman world talking about this Jesus figure. And it's one of the first letters, and it's one of the first lines in Galatians, where he basically says, how dare you, people of Galatia, listen to other people talking about Jesus when I'm the one who came to your city and baptized you in the name of the Lord, and so on. And so it's just such a funny kind of human moment where
You
it's
can
like,
see his ego right
you
there.
can see his ego is going, listen to me, buddy. And so it's in the text, it's in every Bible in the world. And so it's like, this is a human moment of a person who was arguing against other interpretations of Jesus in the first century. This is Paul's letters are 50s, 60s CE. So it's within a couple of decades of Jesus's death, there's already this. Sometimes scholars call it early Christianities because they were so diverse.
A lot of people also assume that the sacred texts were written in one piece, not realizing how much time.
Or that Jesus wrote them. I didn't know that, but somebody even said, yeah, some people think Jesus wrote the Bible, which is not quite the case.
What have you discovered about how the texts have evolved and changed through the different authors and time periods?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite subjects in New Testament scholarship is that, we have basically there's 4 gospels in the New Testament. The order narratively is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But from a scholarship standpoint, there's a consensus that Mark was the earliest gospel. So you have Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. The reason Mark is the second in the book is because Matthew has a birth narrative and Mark doesn't. So Mark, we just come in on him getting baptized by John the Baptist as an adult, while Matthew and Luke have the great nativity stories that have so many different kind of prophetic moments to it, the story of Christmas, etc. But when you look what scholars do, it's called vertical reading, right? So the way that Christians and religious people read the text is they read what's called horizontally. So you start at the first line of Matthew, you read Matthew A to Z, Mark, Luke, and then John. And it all sounds kind of similar, when you read it like that. This guy is walking around and he's teaching and then he gets captured and killed. And, it's all pretty similar stuff. Well, what scholars do is they take the same event, which, by the way, almost no events are in all 4 gospels. Most are in 2, a few are in 3. Some are in 1. And you look at that same either plot point or teaching story, and you compare them. And you just say, what are the characteristics of this story versus this one versus this one? I do it a couple of times in the book. It's, I tried to write more of like somewhere between pop spirituality and religious textbook. It's kind of neither. It's a little too dense for the pop spirituality book crowd, and it's kind of too lighthearted for to be syllabus material, but so hopefully that's what I wanted to do, was kind of end up somewhere in the middle. But anyway, I do it with, for example, the parable of the banquet, the great banquet. Um, it's the wedding invite. Essentially, we have the same story that Jesus tells. He tells it in Matthew, he tells it in Luke, and he also tells it in this other gospel called Thomas, and Gospel of Thomas, which I'm sure you're familiar. And if your listeners aren't familiar, um, highly recommend the Gospel of
That one's my
Thomas.
favorite.
It's incredible, and it's another great component. I'll come back to the parable comparison here, but it's another great component of the humanness of the Bible's formation, because it's very early. It's a sayings gospel, meaning that it's 114 sayings of Jesus, just rapid fire. It's just Jesus said, da, 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 da. And we didn't have it until about 70 years ago. We found scraps of it about 100 years ago in a garbage dump in Egypt, in ancient kind of where there's a lot of ancient texts we found. We had scraps, but we also have for all this millennia, we've had letters of the church fathers saying this one's legit, this one isn't, this one's legit, this one isn't. And so we knew Gospel of Thomas existed. Well, we found it. A shepherd in Egypt. It's called the Nag Hammadi Library, the Nag Hammadi codices. They're not actually scrolls; they're books that were found under a boulder in these jars. It's about 50 different texts, and the Gospel of Thomas is one of them. It's extremely important. It's very early, and because also about 40% of Thomas has parallels in the New Testament, four New Testament Gospels. What's interesting about them, to come back to the comparison between Matthew's version, the Matthean author's version of the Great Banquet parable, the Lucan author's version of the Great Banquet parable, and the Thomas author's version of the Great Banquet parable, is they are different. Thomas is the simplest. And that's the case in all of the parallel material. Thomas is the most threadbare versions of the teaching, which could easily imply, and scholars do imply, this is a healthy debate about this, but some scholars believe that means that Thomas was first. And so Matthew and Luke's authors are taking some of Thomas and expanding on it, because the parable itself is essentially what it is a king, a rich man, tells his servants to go invite people to this great dinner. And it's really short in Thomas. They go out and everybody's busy. All the invitees say, oh, thanks for the invite, but I have my business to run. Thanks for the invite, but I have a family thing. I can't come. And in Thomas, the servants go back to the king, the ruler, and he says, okay, well then just go invite everybody and bring people out in the streets. And that's pretty much it. In Luke, it becomes more socioeconomic. When the servants go back to tell the ruler, he says, like, curse the business owners and curse the rich people. That's a big theme in Luke, is kind of poor, is the advocacy of the poor gospel. Whereas in Matthew is much more sectarian Jewish gospel. It's concerned with the law. The Jesus in Matthew is much more concerned with the prophets in the Old Testament, etc. That's where you get, when at the end of that parable, the ruler curses everyone else who's not on the invite list. Specialness comes in. The line weeping and gnashing of teeth, which is like a kind of a image of modern, hell's conception, that's in Matthew, not in Luke, and not in Thomas. So they're different. You can literally, in my book, you can read the three of them back to back, or look online. But it's extremely revelatory when you make these comparisons, and it's a lot of fun, because you can see what the aims of each author are and what they're trying to get across for their unique audiences and unique communities.
Yeah, I've read probably like about 12 of Bart D. Ehrman's books.
Mm-hmm.
And I really love
You're a
how he
pro
breaks
then.
things down. Yeah. I love how he breaks things down. And I also like to make sure that if I, because I believe that we're fractals of God. We've each come here for a unique experience to gain a little bit of a different understanding. We value diversity in so many ways, except for diversity of thought. We all have to agree on the same thing. But what if that's the very point? What if we're supposed to come here and I'm supposed to think a little bit differently? And even when I feel like I found my soul sister, soul brother that's aligned with so much, I better have at least one unique perspective because then what am I doing here? What am I adding to this existence? Why did God also want to experience the world through me? And so when I am reading a bunch of Bart D. Ehrman's books, which has been so eye-opening, I also want to read like Marcus Borg, where Bart Ehrman went in and he was very Christian, and then he it kind of red pilled him and he's like, hold on. And now he doesn't
Right.
identify with that as much. Marcus Borg, similar, but he came out with a different outcome. He considers himself more of a Christian mystic now, but he's still really identified with Christianity. Then there's books like or Jesus and the Lost Goddess. And I just want all of the different perspectives so that I can tune in and say, all right, now what is this guiding me toward? What do I feel like I actually still need to know versus what doesn't matter, but it more so matters what this just sparked in me and what I feel like doing afterwards and how I'm going to share the message of love with all of these different inputs. And so often we're arguing about these specifics when we don't step back to think, does that matter to me and my life path and what I'm going to do with this information? Or is it just, again, now my ego's being activated instead, which is kind of the opposite of diving into the wisdom traditions, is to activate the love side of you, the God side of you, not the ego part. So all that being said, I think it's just really important to have different perspectives, even if they don't agree, and then tune in and say, now what am I being guided toward? What feels right for me? What am I moving forward with this information?
Yeah, I love how you put that. It's no surprise that you have a very well-known podcast because you just framed that very well, which is a challenging subject in terms of, there's a lot of different angles I could go in that, but what I would start with is to say modern psychology has been really useful in showing us the differences of our, you know, kind of neuroses and traumas and psychological kind of aspects and qualities. People are different, some people are extroverts, some people are introverts, some people, there's all these different ways of explaining different human minds and human consciousnesses. And so, there's this idea in mysticism about the mirror, right? Is that kind of everything in our own lives, in our own incarnations, are designed to be exactly proportionate to the needs of your own complex. And I really believe that. And so I think that's speaking to what you were putting out there. Where can I go? What's inspiring me? What's sparking me? Kind of, the terms are like glitches in the matrix. It's like you kind of get little signs, you get little moments where it's like, okay, cool, you're following it, you're following the breadcrumbs. I will say from like a counter argument standpoint, I had an Apache teacher who's in the book who passed away a couple years ago now, sadly, but where can he go? He lives right here, but he would say, don't get spiritual indigestion. Because I was reading all the books and all the different teachers, and Ramakrishna has a similar line where he says, many shallow wells don't get the water, one deep well does. So I think that there's actually a period of it does seem like there is like an exploratory period where you kind of do want to try all the bites of the buffet and, see what you like and see what your preferences are. And then it does seem like there's a shift into a period of your own spiritual practice. You say, okay, I'm going to zoom in on this one, and maybe it's 10 years or 5, or 3 or 20, I don't know. It's not for me or anyone to tell anyone what that period is, but it does seem like there is usefulness in kind of uh, trying it all and then zeroing in on what is designed for your own awakening.
I love that. And I go back and forth because on one hand, I do have the belief that sometimes more information is just a fancy form of procrastination to actually doing the work.
Correct.
On the other hand, I love learning. I am a lifelong learner. I've always got 9 books going on, but I
Me
just have
too.
to remember like, okay, I've now read 27 books in the last year on this topic. Have I sat down to pray? Have I sat down to meditate? Have I integrated it? Or am I just like going through it? And so I love that because that's the digestion period for me, you know? And so I totally agree with what he's saying. I also wonder, because one of the themes that was like an aha for me in my research was we've talked about how kind of egos come into play, how politics come into play, but also we all know at this point that government needs to control their population. To what level that is, we might disagree on a little bit, but I mean, my husband and I have talked about it. I don't tell my toddler everything. I'm not always telling him the exact reasons I'm making a choice. And sometimes I'm making shit up to make it a little bit easier. And so, of course, my government's doing that. And I don't even blame them. If I was in government, I might with some things. But when you look back at your research and your understanding, what have you identified as an example of a spiritual teaching being used to control populations? What have you identified as an example of a spiritual teaching being used to control populations?
Oh man, that's a good one. We were talking earlier about like the perennial philosophy that connects to religious traditions, right? So every major faith tradition can essentially be divided into two. Most of them can be divided into much more than that. But just for simplicity's sake, you have the exoteric, which is the institution, and you have the esoteric, which is the internal. That word esoteric has kind of become a popular kind of descriptor of a lot of spiritual paths and techniques, etc. But really, all it means is the esoteric traditions don't need mediators. You can access Rumi has a great line. He has a million, but he says, "I searched for the divine in churches, temples, and mosques, and I found the divine in my heart." That's really sums up the mystics. It sums up the esoteric tradition in every religion, whereas the exoteric is the institutional. What happened a couple hundred years ago is that when science, kind of contemporary science, took over from religion, the religions reacted in a way where they either became more exoteric or more esoteric. The kind of prevailing systems of that period a few hundred years ago, that's where we get Amish. That's where we get Wahhabism, which is the kind of precursor to modern day Islamic fundamentalists. Really staunch, kind of Handmaid's Tale stuff. Religion went into like, let's really be rigid and secure because science is wrong and they're trying to disprove us, etc. Or the mystics. A lot of people kind of veered off in the other direction where they said, we're disproving things about religion, but there's also transcendental information beyond science, beyond matter, beyond the material that aligns with my own experience. And so yeah, I mean, I think the exoteric traditions, the institutions aren't all bad necessarily, and that's speaking as a mystic. Historically, they're the ones who killed the mystics. So from a historical standpoint, the Inquisition, that's the exoteric institution. But as a whole, community is okay. It's all right to have fellowship, is the term in Christianity. Satsang in Hinduism, Sangha. In Buddhism, it's okay to have a group of people trying to figure it out together. In fact, it can often be useful. But you just got to be aware that egos are involved and power is involved. And I think especially within kind of spirituality and religion, that specialness component can come in so quickly that, I'm God speaking to me, and it's like, okay, be careful. Be careful with any of those kinds of actions and phrases, etc.
Why do you think institutions often reject their own mystics, even?
Well, ironically, sometimes centuries later they'll re-embrace them because at the time they were unpopular. Um, there's a really good one that I reference. He has a Christ-like narrative where his name was Mansur al-Hallaj, who was a very famous Sufi saint, and Sufis are the mystics of Islam, who I love. That's Rumi and Hafiz, and there's a ton of the mystics are always the writers and poets and musicians, and kind of they're why they're my fave a little bit. Is they're so playful with the cosmic dance. But Mansur al-Hallaj was one of those. He was a Sufi teacher, and the existing institution at that time was not crazy about him. They gained followers kind of on their own, which is a threat to power. He specifically, Hallaj, I hope I can get this correct. Um, he said anal haq in Arabic, which could translate in English to like I am divine, right? And it's that distinction between what the institution thought he was saying was he's God, so let's kill him. And his followers basically said, no, 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 it's a term called fana in Arabic, which means annihilation. He was saying that to his followers, he was saying that I am divine because I've removed all of, again, the individuality. I've erased my individuality and I've just become a vessel. And he was killed. He was famously, the image of his life and death is he danced to the gallows in chains because he was so, and he had entered that space of transcendental kind of ecstatic awareness that it didn't matter. He had accepted his death. Jesus on the cross, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. When you break the veil, it's not that big a deal, what's happening to your body, what's happening to you in the world. So, I think the short answer, that's a long answer. The short answer to your question is they're a threat, because there's a liberation to that, and they want to control as opposed to free people.
Yeah. And that's my main new understanding is that Jesus was showing us the way. I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah.
But as a path that this is possible for us too, not an exception. And we turn a blind eye at these. I mean, it tends to be Eastern regions where it happens most often. And I think it is because of their spiritual practice. That's what guided me towards the Eastern religions more, as Ram Dass puts it, it's more about the transformation over obedience. And I want a transformation. That's what I came here for. And I can feel the pull. And no amount of fear is going to stop that. Because even as a child, I could feel that. I'm like, no, there's got to be something more. I've got to be able to feel this. And so to those empower those that are profiting off of our obedience in whatever way that is, even if they fully believe everything that they're teaching, there's still power in that to show everyone that no, we just need to tune inward. That kind of, I mean, it removes our reins a little bit, takes off of our chains of needing them as much as they'd like us to, I think.
Yeah, the mystic masters would say something like, well, they're just confused, and I mean, it's a really good idea. I mean,
Father, forgive them, for
Jesus,
they know not what they do.
if that's not one of the most sublime sayings in the history of human civilization, I mean, can you imagine how painful that is? I mean, that death is particularly brutal and horrifying. All your friends are there, your mom's there, maybe his wife. That's another podcast. Everybody who cares about him in this world is watching him die brutally, an innocent man. And he says, forgive them, for they know not what they do, to the soldiers who are poking him and causing him pain and bleeding. It's like, no, yeah, congratulations. You've completed, you've transcended the game. You've broken the veil. You've exited the matrix. You've left the cave. Plato's image. You're in the meadow now. And so yeah, like how do you get there? Like what's behind that level of experiential application, because it's like it's one thing to say that, but how he was living that and it came out of his own experience. So, I believe that's what spirituality is really helping us do, is become more loving, become more forgiving, seeing the unity in everyone and everything, really zooming out and saying, oh, they don't know what they're doing. It's like a child, it's like you don't get mad because the baby is, swinging the scissors around. You just take the scissors away. They don't know that they're causing harm to themselves. So that's really the attitude. And how do you do that without patronizing them? Kind of, I'm so high and mighty and they're so low, and they don't understand. No, you do it from a place of, again, that Buddhist kind of motherly love. Can you have that sense of motherly compassion for every being? It ain't easy, but it seems like that's how the shackles come off.
There was another point you brought up in your book that I ended up diving deeper into, but you talked about the Gospel of John's use of logos and how it parallels concepts like Tao and Taoism, Brahman and Hinduism, which, by the way, when I really understood more deeply about the Tao, which I got from Ram Dass, man, I needed that visualization. I needed that understanding to grasp certain things. But my point being, when I went to look up the verses that may have spoke to this, some examples are like John 1:1-3. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. And I'm sorry, but if you think that there's just one obvious, straightforward interpretation to that, then you're nuts. You've just been told the same thing too many times. You could sit there and take little pieces of that and spin it in 100 different ways, depending on your experiences. I know what I believe. I've gotten a lot from the second coming of Christ. I love his identification of what is word. Word is intelligent vibration plus meaning. And those two things are the basis of all creation. And that calls back to the quantum physics. And to me, that's the one that makes the most sense. But we're just told in Christianity, oh, word is obviously Jesus. Yeah, because that's a common nickname for someone. Like,
Right.
it's just,
The Logos.
it's just funny. We're told.
That carpenter.
Yeah, we're told the basics. If we've been going since we were younger, we get the bare basics from pictures of Noah's Ark and all this stuff. But it's like, no, sit there. Allow it to unlock something in you. See what arises. Jesus talked about how he spoke in parables. And why? Because it's just like we learned in marketing. You don't try to be confusing. You speak through stories because stories are what moves us. That's what behavior changes, not just all the facts. And so why would he give us a literal Bible if his whole life was around parables and saying things in such a way that it unlocks different interpretations for each person?
Absolutely great point. Yeah, you mentioned that line a couple of times now, John 14:6, which I think of all the Christian comments on my videos over the years, content over the years, that's the most common one. And so it's kind of like that's like the knee-jerk reaction to the Buddha is cool, or hey, check out Lao Tzu and Taoism. Well, but John 14:6, buddy, it's almost like this excuse for exclusivity. And it's such a bummer, right? Because it's like, oh, you're stuck on this English translation of Latin, of Greek, of Aramaic. I mean, Jesus spoke in Aramaic and the first gospels were written in Greek. So that means that the very first written versions of the New Testament were already a translation. And this isn't, this is Bible scholarship. It's not like I'm just this crazy guy on the internet. Like this, all the most of what I've said, hopefully, can be fact checked by academia. So there's a translation issue with these verses, to your point, in terms of like validating the need for contemplation and bringing in the need for contemplation on what does that really mean beyond what a couple of white guys in America wrote in the 70s, to like the NIV to translate the KJV. The way that I respond to John 14:6 is similar to how you were kind of reading the Logos line. Um, and there's a couple of reasons. If you don't mind, if I just I'll contextualize this one briefly because I've gotten good at it over the years. Which is, one is the translation piece, but two is it's useful in studying these teachers historically too. And Yogananda will add to this. Other mystics will add to this. Scholarship isn't quite there, but it's getting there. Which is that whoever the teacher is talking to in the story is actually very valuable at helping us understand the meaning. So when Jesus is speaking to very large crowds, for example, Sermon on the Mount, it's pretty direct. It's pretty literal. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the peacemakers. He's simplifying it as easy as possible for a large amount of people that don't know him. Secondarily, you have small groups or kind of like a single questioner in a small group, and that's really typically where the parables come in. Is when he's giving the answer in the form of a story. That's critical thinking, to your point. The third, contextual audience circle, if you will. You have the large crowds get the little direct, kind of small groups, or the questioners get the parables. The third group really is the disciples. And so the disciples are people that are living with the master. They're traveling with him. They're studying, they're fasting, they're meditating, they're praying all the time. They understand him better than everybody else. They ought to, or they should. And John 14:6, he's specifically speaking to the disciples. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So early, I am is from Exodus. That's the answer that God gives to Moses when Moses asks the burning bush, the mystical experience he has, what are you? God says, I am what I am. So I am is very powerful. It's beingness, essentially. Eternality of beingness. And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Earlier in John, this is the last piece here. Earlier in John, he also says, before Abraham was, I am. Abraham's the ancient founder of Judaism, right? So he's not talking about this carpenter body from Nazareth. How could he if he was before Abraham? The body of Jesus wasn't before Abraham, but the eternal consciousness, the awareness, the unity consciousness of unconditional love and seeing all as one. That's the I am. And I would even go so far as to say, and it's true, that is the only way to the Father. The only way to the Father, to heaven, is through identifying with the I am unity consciousness of unconditional love, which he did. So there is truth to what he's saying, but it requires that level of like symbolic spiritual language, understanding of the disciples and their proximity to Jesus, and knowing who he truly was when he was referring to himself in these ways, using terms like I am. And then the last thing about 14:6 is, which I can never reply in Instagram comments to contextualize. I saw this. The last thing is, a lot of mystic teachers use this kind of language. The Buddha says, I am awake. Krishna has a whole couple of pages in the Gita where he says, I am the fire on the funeral pyre. I am, I am before, during, and after. I am the ocean. I am the elementals. He identifies with all these different things. He's not talking about Krishna, the Hindu king. He's talking about his level of awareness and kind of veil breaking unity consciousness. So understand, I think what I would summarize all this to say is like the real beauty for me is in understanding the scholarship on one hand and understanding the mystical and spiritual symbolic teachings of this stuff in an experiential way. When you have both of those, you're able to interpret this stuff better. I'm not saying that my interpretation's right or always right. I feel like just as much a student as anyone. Um, but at the same time, I know how the humanness of the Bible, and I also understand other world religions and other teachers, and they have this kind of commonality and things like that. So those help me put it together like this.
I agree completely. I am is a phrase that's used quite a bit, even if I'm not sure if you've heard of Paul Selig, but he has a bunch of channel texts
Yeah,
on the show a couple of times.
awesome.
And even in his channeling, a few of the books are heavy on the I am and claiming that truth within yourself to activate it, because words are very powerful. It is that intelligent meaning plus vibration. So we're activating something in ourselves as we speak. But again, to couple that, what you just broke down, a man even asks Jesus what good deed he must do to inherit eternal life. And he doesn't say anything about, I mean, he does say, follow me, but he says, if you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor and you'll have treasure in heaven. He says it a few different times. He says, go sell everything you have and give to the poor and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. Follow has never meant worship to me. And it's walk like them, do what they do. First of all. Second of all, go sell everything you have. It is the physical manifestation of give up ego, give up material possessions, and then walk like me, basically. And so if I'm ever, my fear-based programming from childhood comes back and I'm like, wait, what if this is not right? It's like, I'm just following exactly what Jesus had told me to do. And I'm putting together all of the different things to see the big picture of what did he really, really mean by all of this. And so I was just really thankful for the way that your book did land in that happy medium. I've read some deep scholarship things. I've read some more lighthearted things. And yours is like that perfect blend that, like I said, was a catalyst to opening my understanding of even more spiritual texts. And so if you were to leave listeners with one thing, whether it's a thought experiment, an action, a question for them to sit with, what would that be?
Well, thank you for the comment on my book and what I'm trying to do. And I think the one of the biggest honors really of my life the last few years, this incarnation, if you will, has been people appreciating it and saying that it was bringing them some clarity and peace. And sadly there's a lot of conditioning that it must be overcome by a lot of people. So we're just getting started, Melissa. I really like, there's an image in the book also that I think is really useful. I try to reference it as much as humanly possible, kind of in this space of interfaith, comparative religion, to some of the points that we've made earlier around validity of, all paths versus one special one. And I'll just share it. It's a good one to go off on. It's called The Four Blind Men and the Elephant. Ramakrishna tells this story. It's considered a Hindu parable, but essentially the story goes that an elephant enters a village and there's four blind men that come out and start feeling different areas of the elephant. And the first blind man feels the trunk, and he says, this animal is like a hose. And the second blind man feels the spear and says, or sorry, the tusk. The second blind man feels the tusk and says, this animal, this entity is like a spear. The third blind man feels the ear and says, this is like a large leaf of a tree. The fourth feels the tail. It says it's like a rope. So they're all arguing. And then someone with sight comes along and they see the four blind men arguing. And they say, well, you're right that the trunk is like a hose. That's true. The tusk is like a spear. Those are all accurate characteristics of this animal. However, it's all of them. All of your interpretations are true, but you're arguing about them being different, as them being different things, whereas there's just different characteristics of this entity. And there's other characteristics of the entity that none of you have felt. There's the feet and the back and the teeth and so on. There's all these different qualities of this entity that are beyond what you guys are arguing about. So I love that image because it so beautifully captures interfaith squabbling, which is so ripe on this planet, even today, of people saying, no, this way is the better, no, this way is the better. The goal is to be like that person, to say, you're right. Christians, if you get joy and peace and love and purpose and all these beautiful spiritual qualities from Christianity, that's your path. You don't have to leave it. Go deeper, dig the deep well. All I ask really for anyone on a religious spiritual journey is just to be open to the other characteristics of the divine and the potentiality, the possibility of there being transcendental characteristics that are beyond all of us, beyond word, beyond thought, etc.
Amen. For listeners that are interested in reading your book or connecting with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, I'm on all the things. It's Bob Peck on Instagram, and I am Bob Peck on TikTok and YouTube. The book is Original Sin is a Lie. It's on most booksellers online. Amazon, yes. I also read the audiobook, which is kind of fun, on Audible. It's also on Spotify. So yeah, just search me there.
All the links from this episode will be at mindlove.com/387. Your challenge for this week is to take one spiritual teaching that you've always accepted at face value and dig deeper into its meaning. Maybe it's a parable you learned as a child or a quote that you've heard 1,000 times. Instead of accepting the standard interpretation, sit with it. Look for layers. Ask yourself what else it might mean. Sometimes the most profound insights come when we're willing to look beyond the surface. So give it a try and let me know how it goes. I love sharing these, so please reach out to me at mindlovemelissa on Instagram. And if you have questions about any of them, I've dug into quite a few. So I would love to chat about that with you. You can find all my incredible sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And if you're not already part of the Mind Love Collective, we have some really exciting things coming up, and members of the collective will always get special discounts. And right now, the program is still only $120 for an entire year of growth. There's a new focus every single month. Many people just wrapped up Vision, but whenever you start at number 1. You can catch up with us. You can go at your own pace. I've designed it to work flexibly the way you work in your life so that it's not another failed goal. The value inside is worth 10, 20 times the cost of the entire year. So it's truly the best time to join our community of seekers and expand our consciousness together. Also, don't forget to sign up for the Morning Mind Love at mindlove.com or text the word morning to 33777. And thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.